Seeing with 2020 Spiritual Vision is the CSL theme for the year, and January's focus is getting grounded. Today's topic, the principles of successful living. Ernest Holmes wrote the chapter, Principles of Successful Living, in the Science of Mind textbook, pages 276 to 278. We should daily train our thought to recognize the Spirit in everything we do, say, or think. A constant realization of the presence of Spirit will provide a sense of divine companionship. As soon as we recognize God is, we can turn to the law and tell it what to do. Spiritual mind treatment, which is affirmative prayer, removes doubt and fear, lets in the realization of the presence of Spirit. We are surrounded by a creative consciousness, which is receptive, neutral, impersonal, always receiving the impress of our thought, and which has no alternative other than to operate directly upon it, thus creating the things which we think. Look to the screen and speak this truth with me. I am a unique expression of Spirit, stepping into life in ever more amazing ways by living in alignment with spiritual principles, choosing thoughts, words, and actions that enable me to live an empowered and positive life. Thank you.
So, training our minds. I want to focus today on this idea of the principles of spiritual living with a focus on the form of prayer that we teach here, which is spiritual mind treatment. That's a term that Ernest Holmes came up with. It's an affirmative prayer. It's a prayer that's based in an understanding that we are surrounded by a universal mind of God. We dwell in it. We live, move, and have our being in it, and it is within us. And so every time we think and speak, we're thinking and speaking into this creative medium that surrounds us. So more about that later. I do want to share with you, though, that training the mind, which is what Ernest Holmes said, it's important for us to practice daily, actually moment by moment. Training the mind is like training a puppy. The untrained mind is like an untrained puppy, right? And think about a puppy. A puppy, a puppy, a brand new puppy runs around and chews on things, things that like your shoes or your furniture, or your clothing, or your hands or your feet. And just because that's what puppies do, untrained puppies do. They just chew on everything imaginable. They're teething and so on. And then they also often make big messes, in the corner or on the rug. And the untrained mind is the same way. Think about it. The untrained mind chews on worries, chews on criticism, chews on what's wrong, and as a result creates a big mess, right? So as we train the mind, and spiritual mind treatment is actually a beautiful way to do that, and I'll be talking about in a few minutes this form of prayer that we use, because a trained mind then, rather than chewing on worries and doubt and fear and all of that, feasts on spiritual truth, nourishes itself, feasts on higher visions, feasts on what is good and true and beautiful. Yeah? So that's what the trained mind does, and that's what we want to encourage our minds to do. And so this form of prayer actually is designed to do that. And Ernest Holmes, I have to say, this man is just brilliant. I am so inspired every time I read him, and I've been doing this since 1990, right? And going back and rereading and going deeper. And this form of prayer, I have come to realize, is a way of filling are feasting or filling ourselves with higher truth, actually making that impression of truth on the creative medium of mind that's around us. You know that in quantum physics, they found that thought collapses light into particles. Did you know that? Yeah, it's actually if in the movie What the Bleep and Down the Rabbit Hole, the science. If you've ever seen those movies, they go into the science of how the mind does that and the experiments that they've done that show how observed light waves collapse into particles. So our observation, our thoughts are like a mold. They create a mold out of light and create form. And when we really get that, I mean, really get that, we realize how important what we allow into our thought world is. And yes, thoughts arise. You know, I'm not going to say that we can control every single thought that appears in our minds. Thoughts arise up out of the subconscious mind, or you know, we have things that come to us through the media or other people or conversations. And yet, what we do have is we have a choice of what we do, whether we entertain those thoughts or whether we remind ourselves, wait a second, I'm creating in every moment with my thoughts. So we can turn it around. And that's where our power is and our mastery is to turn it around. So, as I'm talking about this thing called spiritual mind treatment, I want to start with all of the different stages. There's actually 5 different stages that we teach. And the first two actually have to do with developing spiritual realization, developing oneness consciousness. I'm going to just give you other words: spiritual realization, oneness consciousness, God consciousness, Buddha consciousness, Krishna consciousness, Christ consciousness. All these, these are just different ways of saying the same thing, of developing this expanded consciousness of oneness and wholeness. And so the first stage is recognition, and it's where we just fill ourselves with statements of what our best concept, highest concept of what God is, or what spirit is, or what this allness is. Absolute intelligence, universal mind, the field of all possibility and all potentiality. Light and love, peace and joy, all good, the all intelligence, the omnipotence, the all power, creative mind. We can go on and on to describe this presence, and when we do, when in the foundations classes we go around and we talk about all these descriptions of the divine or other names of the divine. And what we notice is that as we do that, we feel expanded, we feel lighter, we feel freer, and our mind gets very quiet. Our mind gets quiet and we come into the present moment. The mind chatter stops. That's the training that's going on just by focusing on the nature of the divine, of the all that is. We quiet the mind, we train the mind to be in the present moment and to live in an expanded state. So that's recognition. Unification. So when we move into unification, we are realizing that if all there is this one presence, this one source, this one life that we can call whatever we want, God, Spirit, the universal mind, then we are that life individualized. We are that life individualized. And just as the one life is creator, we are participating in creation. Every thought, everything we focus on is part of creation. We are full participants in creation. We can either do that unconsciously just by letting the puppy mind take us all over the place, or we can begin to train that mind to focus on the good, the true, and the beautiful. And some people might say, well, isn't that like being in denial of what's happening? And there's a difference. Yes, we can acknowledge and see what's going on in the world, And because we realize of the creative nature of the mind, that means that we move our minds then into a new vision. We start planting new seeds of creation in universal mind, because we know that the universal law is designed so that it responds. It only knows yes. Universal law, the universal mind of God only knows yes, this aspect of the divine. And so it will produce what we put into it. And so that's a really important thing to remember, is if you just imagine yourself surrounded by a creative medium, and that's, which is the truth. You can think of it as energy if you're more scientifically oriented, that takes the impress of our thought, in other words, collapses light waves into particles and forms our experience and our reality. So that's spiritual realization, or those first two stages. And I just am reminded by the scripture that says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We renew our minds every time we remind ourselves of truth. Okay, then the third stage is when we actually move into conscious creation. Well, although we're consciously creating in the first stage, but this is where we have a focus and in a particular direction. And it's called either realization, or there's another branch of our teaching that calls it declaration. And I kind of like declaration too, because it's like Ernest Holmes says, as soon as we realize who we are in truth, and we realize the presence of spirit everywhere, and we have a sense of divine companionship, then we can turn to the law and tell it what to do. We can turn to the law. And there, some of our predecessors, and I'm thinking of Emma Curtis Hopkins. One of her favorite things what approaches to that is she commands the law. She commands the law because she understands that law just takes the impress of our thought and brings it back. So she stands in her power and commands the law. And so in this particular stage then, declaration or realization, this is where imagination and vision comes in, because it's important that we turn away from appearances and begin to entertain a higher vision. Entertain a higher vision. And imagination, vision, the inner vision that is beyond what's going on in the physical world, is where creation takes place. So the images that we hold in our minds are creation unfolding, creative potential. And everything gets created in the mind first, before it shows up in the manifest world. Along with this idea of imagination is using the inner senses, feeling, seeing, and hearing on an inner plane, So using all the senses imaginable, and especially the feeling, because we know that we've had a really powerful prayer when our feeling is uplifted, when we feel greater peace, greater joy, greater optimism, right, Donna?
That's
greater
right.
greater optimism. When we feel light and free, and we understand we're in this field of possibilities, that we have an opportunity to bring down, or I don't know if it's down is the right word, but bring into this world of experience. It's a very empowering way to approach life, because we're standing in our divinity. We're standing in who we are in truth. We're not begging some God out there to fix things, which is kind of a codependent idea of God, when this presence has given us the tools and the abilities, and the power has allowed us to use this universal power to create heaven on earth, a world that works for everyone. And so when we're creating, I always like to and include in that the highest and best for me and for other people and for everyone everywhere, so that the universal mind is operating on a higher plane than maybe I can even come up with my own imagination. So feeling excited, feeling joyful, feeling grateful, and I didn't mention it's the same thing in the realizations and in the recognition and unification stage. It's the feeling that we cultivate, and the two particular feelings that are so powerful, and that those first two stages are awe and wonder. When we're in a state of awe and wonder of the miraculous nature of life, then we know that we've done a really good job in those first two stages. And it's the same thing in declaration or realization. When we're feeling lighter and freer and excited and joyful and grateful, we know that we've planted a really wonderful seed thought in universal mind. If you have trouble visioning or with imagination, anything that you have a challenge with, that's a good topic for your prayer. Is to use your words and just declare, I have the imagination of universal mind. My mind is one with the mind of God, the ultimate, brilliant one that can imagine anything, any possibility. And I have that same imagination. So again, that goes into the law and is revealed in our lives. So we use the power of our words to embody and to express the very highest aspects of ourselves. Yeah. Then our job is to remain focused on the desired outcome from that point, or just to get ourselves involved in life, and full trust and faith. And then allow the spirit, the infinite intelligence, the creative power of the universe to do its work, to help unfold it. So it helps us to get out of that mode of struggle and strife, trying to make things happen. This has been an ongoing journey for me. It is letting go and trusting. It doesn't mean we don't take action, but it means we take inspired action, and there's an effortlessness to it. It doesn't feel like a big struggle. A really great example is I was struggling with this message last night, and Michelle and I sat down and prayed. And there was a great reminder that everything is ease and grace in spirit. And the preparation of my messages are that way as well. I was planting a new seed thought for myself. So, this is like having a conversation with ourselves, right? It's like using that habit of talking to ourselves in a really good way. So this is a very, very fruitful form of prayer. This talking ourselves, convincing ourselves of a higher truth and a higher vision for our lives. The next thing I want to talk about, I want to take us on a little bit of a different journey by talking about the law of thought transmission. And this is a concept that Neville Goddard came up with. I was rereading some of his material, and he's also a New Thought author and very much into wanting to understand how the creative process works. And so he came up with this law of thought transmission. And so I want you to ponder this question. Are other people safe walking through your mind? Are other people safe walking through your mind? So think about that. So the law of thought transmission basically goes like this. Whatever we are thinking about is transmitted to another person. But also there's the mirror effect that's going on we are also planting that same seed in our own subconscious mind. So if we are griping about another person, no matter who they are, we are actually, our subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between that other person and ourselves. We're planting that same gripe to be the truth about ourselves. This is how the law or the subconscious mind works, because we are one. So think about it. If you have ever rehearsed an argument that let's say you had a conflict with somebody and you go and you just keep chewing on this argument and how you would have said it differently and how you would have told them off, and what are we doing? We are rehearsing continued conflict with that other person and possibly other people. So how do we turn that around? We begin to start having a happy conversation with that person, knowing their spiritual truth, telling them their spiritual truth in our minds, telling ourselves our spiritual truth, just operating on a higher plane. Then that's what we're planting in universal mind. What are the concepts? I'm talking about how can somebody walk safely through your mind. What are the concepts you have about other people? Think about it. Are there people who they get on your last nerve, and and so you're thinking about all the things you don't like about them? Are they safe walking through your mind if you're doing that? And so what could you do instead? You could start seeing them as happy, productive, joyful people. We could begin to see their truth and support them in their evolutionary process. And we can do that as long as we're doing it on a higher plane, seeing their higher truth. Again, this is the understanding of this law of transmission, because we think, this is how I like to think of it, is that we are like broadcasting stations, universal broadcasting stations. There is the universe, there are thoughts in the universal mind that are circulating, and when we do spiritual mind treatment, we raise ourselves up into the stratospheres and we catch these higher ideas in the mind of God. But when we are complaining, we're hanging around in what Ernest Holmes called race consciousness. He meant human race consciousness, or that was called collective consciousness by Carl Jung. We're hanging around in that, and that's often full of noticing what we don't like and noticing what's wrong, and having our focus on all of that, which just creates more of that. So spiritual mind treatment lifts us up into the stratospheres, and we catch the higher broadcast that's going on. And we also are able to broadcast out these ideas to everyone else. So we're uplifting all of humanity. That's what spiritual mind treatment does. I love it. Mm-hmm. So the law of transmission, it's a law of the mirror effect. We talk about that all the time in our Power of Eight group. I invite you, if you haven't done it already, to be a part of that, where we focus intention on, focused intention for the person who's the one receiving the prayer. We say intention, but it's really prayer. Whenever we use our imaginations and see the highest and best of someone, it really is another form of the same thing that we were talking about, spiritual mind treatment. The mirror effect, that's when we realize that the prayers that we offer to others, when we see another person's higher truth in our mind's eye, we are receiving the same benefit of that, the mirror effect. In fact, Lynn McTaggart's research shows that the person offering the prayer is actually benefited even more than the person that's receiving the prayer. So it's all of this. We wrap all of this together. Our first two stages: recognition, unification, realization or declaration. The third stage. The other two stages, the final two stages, relate to being open to receive. And that's where we just give thanks in advance that it's already done. And remember, when we're doing a treatment in the realization, we're talking about it as if it's already happening now, because that's how universal mind, or our subconscious mind, which is part of universal mind, works. It works in the present moment. And so when we're releasing it, when we're giving thanks that it's already happening, that's the fourth stage. The fifth stage is I release it now to the universal law. That's another way of saying I let go and I let God. I surrender it to the law. I trust. And then we get on with our lives and we let the universal law work. So there's a little poem, and it's just a one-line poem that's so powerful to remember, and it goes like this. There were two prisoners peering through the bars. One saw mud, and the other saw stars. Let us be the ones who see the stars, the field of infinite potentiality and possibility that sets us free. So let's turn within in prayer. So I just feel so grateful, so thankful for this opportunity to speak the truth, knowing that this is a friendly universe, that this is a spiritual universe, that truly God is all there is, one source, one life, one presence, one power, one infinite universal mind. And therefore, it is my presence, my life is the life of God. My nature is the same nature of God. And the same is true about everyone in this room. We are all the light, the love, the peace, the joy, the harmony, the grace, the beauty, the magnificence, the creative nature of that divine presence itself. So I'm knowing what's happening here today is that everyone is now living in a heightened awareness of the importance of training the mind to stay focused on the good, the true, the beautiful. And as we do that, I'm knowing that our lives are lived on a higher plane. We live in a higher plane. We are broadcasting stations for spiritual truth. We are broadcasting stations for heaven on earth. We are beings who receive the very highest ideas in the mind of the infinite universal presence and disseminate them. And therefore, we are co-creators of heaven on earth, a world that works for everyone. We know that power. We have that power. We use that power for good. And we are allowing the Spirit to use our lives for good. It's this beautiful cycle of life. And I'm thinking of this beautiful song by Deb, that it not only blesses us, it blesses others, it blesses everyone because we share the same universal mind. So I just give thanks that this word spoken is fulfilled. It doesn't come back void, it comes back fulfilled. And I release it now to the universal law of mind in full faith and trust that it is done. And so let's accept this with a raucous yes, and so it is. Amen.